and welcome to Mann's Model Moments. Seeing Matt from Model Minutes do an aircraft he had done in his youth, watch out for that coming on his channel in the future, got a few of us chatting about some of our old stuff. Now, I've actually had two breaks from modelling in my life. One was after I was about 12 or so and started to get more into wargaming and then D&D, with that break lasting until just after I finished my PhD and met my ex-wife. I then had just under a decade of modelling before having a family, and then restarting with the birth of the YouTube channel in 2022. As such, there is no remaining evidence of my childhood modelling efforts, which is probably for the best. My second sojourn into modelling predated decent digital cameras and mobile phones, so the records of them are actual physical prints. However, in the early days of the net, I used to do some HTML coding and set up my own model website, so I did have to scan everything for display back then. Bear that in mind when I show you the very low resolution images ahead. Still, I thought it might be fun to go back in time and show you how I've developed as a modeler, and some important landmarks along the way, in the hope that it gives you encouragement in your own modelling journey. This is a photo of the oldest model project I have from about 1996 or 1997, just after getting back into modelling. It's the Matchbox HE111H in 1/72nd scale, and it's the first aircraft model that I really tried on as an adult, and I really liked it. It was sometime shortly after finishing this model that I went to my first scale Model World show in the UK, and realised what I'd done was, in my own eyes, garbage. I hadn't filled or sanded any gaps, I'd hand-painted it with Humbrol enamels straight out of the pot, including the canopy, the crew looked like wooden mannequins, and I'd done no weathering. What I'd seen at the show was truly amazing, and in comparison my Heinkel looked like its nickname, a spade. Now I'm sure many people out there have felt this way. Indeed, I know some who do right now. This kind of moment has three main paths. You can give up, because you're never going to be that good. You can carry on doing what you do regardless because you just enjoy sticking plastic together. Or you can attempt to improve your skills. Now I hope no one ever chooses to give up, because this is a great hobby with many benefits, and the truth is that all of us have probably felt like this at some point. There are those people amongst us who are strong enough to carry on with what they do regardless, and it does take strength because there are those out there who just aren't very nice and will decry models made to your standards rather than theirs, but this is their problem and not yours. Far more intimidating is the pressure you put on yourself, but if you've got to the point where you feel your skills have matured and this is how you model, then you're probably one of the happiest modelers out there, and I salute you. I'm almost there, but not quite. Anyway, I chose to try to improve my skills and find out how people created models like I'd seen, because I simply had no idea. I had naively thought that my childhood mistakes on models were due to impatience and lack of precision, and now as an adult I could take my time and be careful, and so the model should be perfect. That of course didn't explain the gulf between my Heinkel and those models I saw at Scale Model World. Remember, there was practically no internet back then when AOL, Yahoo, and Alta Vista ruled the virtual world. So I read magazines and books and joined a model club. I learned about cement and fillers and sanding. I learned about airbrushing and masking, adding details and plasticard, wire, weathering, and more. Every time I learned something, I tried it, and I started to progress rapidly on my modelling journey. This didn't happen overnight, of course, but piece by piece, although some of those steps had a big impact on my model making. I guess the first of these was filling and sanding, making sure the model was actually prepped for painting rather than just as it came. As you can see from this example, I worked on a lot of models that needed everything from a small touch to being mostly filler. I tried different materials, from off-the-shelf modelling putties to two-piece epoxies like green stuff and Milliput. I don't really use any of those today, but finding out what worked best for me was an important part of developing the skills I needed. Of course, a shorter path might have been easier, which is why I think modelers today are so lucky with easy access to the accumulated experience of so many through tools like YouTube and similar platforms. So here you can see a few models I did around this time, all still hand-painted with enamels. Ignore the exhaust staining on the Dornier that was applied by airbrush much later on. This little Matchbox i16 shows some of what I then experimented on. The kit has virtually nothing in the cockpit, so rather than try to scratch build or detail it, I decided on a tarpaulin thrown over the cockpit, which makes sense to me given it was very open. The other big change for me was going from painting enamels by hand to spraying them. Here's one of my first examples. As shown by the open canopy, I also became bolder about modifying and improving kits. Now, a big part of boosting my detail modelling was in the introduction of photo etch and resin pieces, and learning both how to deal with them and their advantages and disadvantages. Resin offered a huge boost in detail, but was limited in what was available, and it was expensive. Photo etch often offered more cost-effective boosts, especially in areas like seatbelts, but outside of that, it's an absolute pain in the ass to use. This Revell Hurricane Mark I was a pretty bad kit, being an ancient tooling from 1962. The lights in the wings here are added from clear sprue cut and polished to shape, the canopy is a Falcon vac form replacement, and the cockpit has a new photo etch seat and belts. Not that you can see any of that here in this photo. The camo is sprayed, and that on the body was freehanded. The Revell TA152H is likewise a really old and pretty poor offering. Originally it's a frog kit, but at the time there wasn't really anything else readily available. This took a lot of work too, adding in a complete scratch-built cockpit with photo etch seat and belts, new resin wheels, and a lot of filling and sanding. I was really happy with the end result though, including the weathering that I did. During this time I also got more into research and checking on the accuracy of kits I was making. I think this really started with me joining the IPMS and one of the RAF SIGs at the time, and the airfix Westland Whirlwind. I really like the Whirlwind, and noticed that airfix had some strange fairings moulded into the underside of the wing and fuselage, which aren't really visible on most wartime photos of the aircraft. After reading about it, I found that the central fairing was actually only ever used in training, as it caught the spent 20mm cases from the Hispano so that they could be recycled. The fairing on the wing was the gun camera, but it was in the wrong place. It should be on the right of the fuselage, not way out on the wing. Now the Whirlwind was a very tight design, and its position there just wouldn't have worked. Now these are both relatively easy things to correct, and I removed both with a razor saw, filled the central hole with plasticard and filler, and reattached the gun camera in its correct location. I found the whole process very interesting and rewarding, and I'd learned a whole bunch of stuff doing it all. I wouldn't ever call out someone else's model on these aspects, but I found doing this for myself a very good and rewarding thing for me. Around this time, I then gradually transitioned to Tamiya paints for spraying and working on airbrush control, and introducing more elements of weathering routinely to my kits, like gun and exhaust staining and paint chipping. This pair of RAF aircraft were new Revell kits at the time, completed for my ex's grandmother's birthday, as she was in the WRAF, and she also married a bomber navigator. I also did the BF-109G10 at around the same time, and these Revell kits were all excellent new tools. That is not true of the old KP-IL-10. I'm not sure where I got this kit from, but it was the first kit I tried using painted decal film to frame the replacement vac-form canopy. There's a lot of filler in this kit, which is something it bears in common with the next kit. This is the PMTA-183. This was a super cheap, super basic, and not very good kit, but I enjoyed making something out of it, despite its faults, and I do have a soft spot for Luftwaffe 46 subjects. This Defense of the Reich Butcherbird D was a kit I really enjoyed as well. I love the bright identification bands on the airfield defense doors, and Academy's kit made the whole thing pretty easy. I masked and painted the underside, with the upper surfaces all freehand airbrushed. I did like the Academy kits at the time, which were pretty decent and pretty good value, and I'm not sure what prompted me to do the P40N, but once again I was pretty happy with the end result here. I decided to push my airbrushing skills a bit more with this one, a Dragon MiG-27 in 1/144 scale, all done freehand. This leads me to the last model of the 20th century here, one I really put a lot into, the personal mount of Hans Joachim Marcellus, German fighter ace. This is a 109F from Italeri, and I employed a lot of the things I'd learned up to this point into this model, including the first time I think that I used oil washes on a kit. At this point I started to do reviews for print magazines, and this F-16 was the first thing I got. This was a different sort of modelling because it wasn't about the end results, it was looking at the process of the build, but still producing something photo-worthy in a relatively short amount of time. I didn't know it at the time, but this was good practice for YouTube many decades later. Now at this point of the video, I just want to thank all of my Patreon and YouTube channel members. I mentioned that I was going to put this mid-roll in future videos in my prior video on this, and I had to add a few more names onto the list since then, so thank you so much to all of you. Your help at this time is very much appreciated. If you are able to become a channel member, it really does contribute a huge amount to me being able to keep the channel going, and at the moment it's my preferred platform for support. At this point I was newly married and we had our first son on the way. I changed jobs, which required a move from Cheshire to Wiltshire, which also meant trying to find a new model club and getting set up for modelling again. Around this time I also took on larger scale kits, where the increase in size also meant a greater opportunity to add more detail, as in this Revell Monogram Pro Modeler 110G. Cockpit is all the original kit, with only photo etch belts added, but the Daimler-Benz engine and open nose showing the Mark 108 cannon are both aftermarket resin extras. I was still on a budget, however, as money was still pretty tight after paying for our own wedding and moving to a larger house in a more expensive part of the country. As such, I often did pretty cheap kits, which often needed a lot of work. A good example is the VEB Plastikart 1973 tooling of the SU-7. This company was from East Germany, and it's a pretty horrible kit. It's clearly meant to portray a Sukhoi Su-7 BKL, because it has some representation of things like the bulged front gear doors for the larger rough field landing wheels and the rear drogue parachute fairing. It has the general shape of the aircraft, but something just didn't look right, and laying it out on plans shows the issues. The aircraft is too long, and the rear of the fuselage has a lot of errors. The parachute fairing is completely the wrong shape, which also highlights the incorrect rudder, and in fact the vertical stabilizer is too far back and the exhaust protrudes way past it. As if this wasn't enough, the aircraft has raised panel lines thicker than Matchbox engraved ones. You could of course ignore all of that and just build the kit, but these are not minor issues and they do make the aircraft look wrong, so I cut 4mm out of the fuselage, removed the vertical stabilizer and moved it forward, trimmed the rear exhaust, and built up the parachute fairing and rudder. All the huge panel lines were taken off and the whole thing sanded smooth. I put a jet exhaust nozzle with afterburner ring from the spares box into the back and started to reassemble everything. The Hawker Typhoon from Revell here is perhaps an even more extreme example. Here I built the complete cockpit from scratch using stretch sprue, plasticard, wire and a few items from the spares box. It just goes to show that modelling is such an individual hobby, and even one person will choose different paths depending on their situation, mood or preference at the time. One way is to buy aftermarket items, another is to scratch build, and the third is to mix and match. There is no right way, but trying a bit of everything lets you determine what's right for you and builds your skills, so I'd always recommend giving these things a go. Anyway, I was finding increasingly less time for modelling as my son grew rapidly, and then our first daughter arrived 3 years later. One of the last projects I started was this Heinkel HE162 from Revell, released in 2004. It's a lovely kit, and I built this one out of the box, but never quite completed it before the roller coaster of children, school, and all that brought, plus a start-up business with some friends, which led to a 15-year or so hiatus, until the start of my YouTube channel in 2022. So that more or less brings you up to date. I hope it's been insightful to peek into the past of some of my modelling journey and show where I came from and some of how I developed over the span of about a decade. I hope you can see the progression over the models I've shown here, and although all of these were aircraft, there were vehicles and sci-fi mixed in there too, but for some reason no pictures of them that I have access to right now. If there are any of those old projects that I showed today that got mothballed that you'd be interested in seeing finished, please do let me know in the comments below, and I'll see what I can do in blowing the dust off and breathing some life back into them. That's all for this instalment of Mann's Model Moments. If you enjoyed the video, please click the like button, subscribe to the channel for more like it, and share this video with others you think would also enjoy it. You can also follow me on Instagram, Twitter and Facebook, and if you're feeling generous, then I also have a Patreon, which is absolutely the best way of helping me to grow the channel and produce more content like this. With that, I hope you have plenty of modelling moments of your own, and I look forward to welcoming you on the next video.